Raindrops Over Maple Hill. Tonight, those words echo like a quiet spell drifting through the dark, a gentle invitation wrapped in mist and memory. And if you listen closely, you might hear the soft tapping of raindrops brushing over old maple leaves, as if someone or something were walking just beyond the edge of your sight. This is Evelyn Blackwood, whispering to you from Midnight Murmurs Radio, guiding you into a bedtime story, a sleep story, a relaxing story woven like a slow guided sleep meditation through the drifting rain of Maple Hill, where peaceful nights hide stories older than the hill itself. Stories that wait for the brave and the weary. Stories that feel coziest, most peaceful, almost magical, and forever calming as you let yourself slip into the gentle hush of night. And before we step into the quiet heart of Maple Hill, I want you to settle down wherever you are and gently let your body sink into comfort. Feel the mattress cradle your weight, your shoulders letting go, your breath softening, as if each inhale is a small lantern and each exhale is a sigh of release. Close your eyes now, slowly, unhurried, letting the world outside blur away, letting every worry loosen like a knot finally undone, letting your thoughts drift like fallen leaves carried by the autumn breeze. Imagine, just for this moment, that you are wrapped in a warm blanket of rain sounds, steady, rhythmic, soft as velvet tapping. Feel your legs grow heavy, your hands relaxed, your jaw unclenching as though night itself is smoothing away the stress of the day. This is your safe space, your quiet haven, the place where no one asks anything of you, where you can breathe, rest, wander into a gentle world shaped only for you. And now that your breath has become slow and even, let the rain over Maple Hill welcome you into a place where time moves like drifting mist, where the forest hums with secrets, where the old wooden houses sit beneath towering red maples that sway like ancient guardians. Our story begins with a soft, rhoda, narrow path made of wet gravel, leading up the slope of Maple Hill, glowing faintly under lantern-shaped streetlights crafted in the 1890s, their warm, amber hues casting trembling reflections on puddles below. The hill has always been a place people whispered about, peaceful, scenic, but touched by something strange, as if history had folded itself into the soil, leaving echoes that never fully faded. Travelers often said they felt watched, but not by anything malicious, more like a gentle presence lingering in the branches, observing, remembering. On this night, the rain is steady, but not harsh. The kind of rain that feels alive, the kind that carries stories in every drop. And walking up the old path is Lena Harrow, a quiet woman who has returned to Maple Hill after years away, drawn back, not by family or nostalgia, but by a letter she received 2 weeks ago, an envelope sealed with wax, bearing an emblem of a maple leaf crossed by a single raindrop. The letter contained only one sentence: "What you left behind still waits for you on the hill." No signature, no explanation, only that haunting line, as if written by the rain itself. Lena's footsteps are soft on the wet ground, her umbrella tapping the wind, her breath mixing with the cool night air as she approaches her childhood home, a cottage built in 1885, a place she once loved but later abandoned after a tragedy no one in the town dared to speak of. For years, She tried to forget the strange occurrences that happened in that house. The soft footsteps at 3 a.m., the way the maple tree outside scratched the window. Though there was no wind, the faint sound of a music box playing from the attic, even though she'd never owned one. And then, of course, there was the night her brother vanished without a trace, leaving nothing but a damp maple leaf on his pillow. As Lena reaches the gate-rusted, crooked, still etched with the initials of the family who lived there, before her she pauses, listening. The rain seems to grow quieter around her as Eve Whiting. The air feels thick, almost expectant, and somewhere behind the door of the house, she hears it. A faint creaking, like someone rocking slowly in an old wooden chair. But no one has lived here for 15 years. Lena draws a slow breath, steady yet trembling, and steps toward the porch. The house breathes with her, exhaling a long-forgotten sigh. In the glow of the old lantern, the raindrops shimmer over the maples, whispering stories. And as the night deepens, the past begins to stir. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The front door gave a long, thin, weathered creak as Lena pushed it open, as though the house had recognized her the moment she stepped onto the porch, and answered with a breath of its own. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of aged timber, mingled with the cool trace of mint, her mother's old habit. Placing dried mint leaves in drawers at the start of every October, and Lena remained still for a moment, letting the dimness settle into her eyes, letting the rhythm of the rain outside blend with the cautious thrum of her heartbeat. Despite all the years she had stayed away, everything inside the house seemed oddly unchanged. The grandfather clock against the wall remained silent, yet Lena could almost hear a distant ticking, soft, uneven, the kind of sound that felt less like machinery and more like time itself, knocking against the walls of her memory. She stepped forward, the weak lantern glow spilling through the window, casting blurred gold over the family portraits coated in dust, each familiar face frozen in a past she had avoided for so long. The rain kept falling steadily, but with every step she took, the sound seemed to split into two layers, one real, one eerily reminiscent of that long-ago night when her world crumbled into pieces too sharp to gather. Lena set her bag down on the table, and the instant her hand left the strap, a faint sound drifted from the floor above a soft footstep. So light it resembled a child running toward a bedroom after being called by a parent. She froze. No wind, no movement, no one living in the house. Yet the memories she had buried began to stir like dust rising from an opened attic door. She closed her eyes, pulling a long breath in, trying to anchor herself with logical. Houses expand, wood shifts, rain creates illusions, but before the thought could finish, another sound came, clearer this time, the scrape of a wooden chair being dragged a few inches across the floor upstairs. A cold shiver rippled along her spine. No, impossible, she whispered, though her feet moved of their own accord toward the staircase, drawn as if by a gentle yet unavoidable pull. When her hand touched the banister, a chill seeped into her skin, not the coolness of rain, but the particular cold of a place long unoccupied by the living. She climbed slowly. Each creaking step weighted less by her body than by the emotions pressing in from all directions. At the top, she paused, sensing that the mint scent was stronger here, fresh, almost as if someone had just opened a drawer stuffed full of dried leaves, as if her mother were still preparing the house for the autumn festivities, as if time itself had never moved forward. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and quiet, lit only by the faint reflection of the downstairs lantern. She remembered the second room on the left, her brother's bedroom, the one with the tiny window facing the red maple grove on the hill, and as soon as the memory passed through her mind, the door to that room began to open, slowly, soundlessly, with no wind and no reason. Lena bit her lip, walked toward it, and when she leaned forward to peer inside, her heart tightened painfully. The room was silent, untouched, yet something lay in the center of the flora, single red maple leaf, bright and dry, unrealistically fresh, as though it had fallen only moments ago, and beside it a narrow streak of water leading from the window to the leaf despite the window being firmly shut. She knelt down, reaching out with a trembling hand, and the instant her fingers brushed the leaf, a surge of images clashed through her mind. The storming night, the sound of the window slamming open, her brother calling her name in fear, and then Celan Sotoro, it swallowed the world. She jerked her hand back, breath shaking, and before she could compose herself, a whisper drifted behind her, so faint yet unmistakably close. "Lena, you came back." A child's voice. Familiar. Impossible. She turned slowly, but the hallway remained empty, dark, chilled, motionless. The rain outside grew a little harsher, beating the roof as if to warn her, but Lena knew, with a deep sinking certainty, that whatever she had abandoned on Maple Hill had never been laid to rest. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Lena remained frozen in the dim hallway, her hands still hovering in the air where the whisper had brushed past her like a cold fingertip, and though the house fell silent again, the stillness felt charged, as if every plank of wood, every nail, every shadow was holding its breath. She forced herself to swallow, to move, to break the invisible tension stretching between her and the memory of a voice that should no longer exist. And she stepped back toward the stairs, trying to steady her mind by telling herself that long-forgotten places often stir long-forgotten echoes. But as she descended, she noticed something wrong. The arrangement of the framed photos lining the stairwell looked different, slightly shifted, imperceptibly altered, as though someone had walked through just moments before and brushed their fingers along the edges, straightening them or nudging them into a new order only they understood. One particular photograph made her stop mid-step, her fingers tightening on the railing. Halloween, 1999. The last celebration they had spent together, her brother in his tiny cowboy costume grinning wide beneath the glow of carved pumpkin lanterns, and Lena beside him, her hand wrapped around his. But now, as she stared at the photograph, she felt her breath catch his smile was blurred, smudged at the edges of his mouth, as though the image itself was trying to erase a truth she had forgotten or refused to face. She took an involuntary step backward, her heel landing on something that clicked faintly beneath her shoe. She bent down and picked up a thin splinter of wood, a broken strip from some old door frame, and along its surface were fresh scratch marks, sharp, shallow, unmistakably made by fingernails. Human. Recent. A tremor went through her. But she forced herself to keep moving, whispering a shaky reassurance that she needed to get to the living room, to light something, to let warmth anchor her in reality again. But as she neared the bottom of the stairs, a sound drifted into the air, a gentle crackling, warm and familiar. The sound of flames breathing in a hearth. Her steps slowed. The living room fireplace had been unused for more than a decade, yet a soft orange glow flickered across the hallway wall, and with it came a wave of warmth that broke something inside her. A painful mix of relief and dread. Someone was here. Or something wanted her to believe so. She entered the living room, and the sight unraveled her further. The fire danced steadily in the old stone hearth, casting long, wavering shadows that reached up the walls like searching hands, and the rocking chair by the mantel swung lightly back and forth, not wildly, but gently, like someone had risen from it a mere heartbeat before she arrived. Lena sank onto the rug in front of the fire, letting the heat brush across her face. And for a fleeting moment, fragile, aching, almost sweet, she felt the memory of her mother sitting beside her, humming the lullaby she used to sew, the one that always drifted through the house during autumn evenings. But just as the warmth soothed her enough to breathe more easily, a cold breeze swept across the back of her neck, too sudden and too focused to come from any draft. She turned, and there it was, the back door, standing slightly ajar. Rainwater dotted the wooden floor, forming a trail of small wet prints that led inward, not shaped like footprints, but like something pressed and dragged gently across the boards, almost more like small hands than feet. A faint creak rose from the porch outside, followed by another, rhythmic and slow, and Lena felt her pulse spike as she walked toward the door. She pushed it open just enough to look out into the yard, and her breath hitched there in the rain. The old swing set swayed back and forth, its rusty chains groaning in the quiet storm, even though the maple branches overhead remained completely still. No wind, no movement, nothing except the swing, moving as if pushed by someone unseen. And on the wooden seat lay a single red maple leaf, perfectly dry despite the rain, perfectly placed, as if set there by a careful, tiny hand. Her legs weakened, the world tilting slightly as if the house itself leaned in to listen to her fear. She stepped back, trying to steady her breathing, and that was when she heard it again, closer than before, clearer than before, trembling with emotion that mirrored her own pleas. "Don't go." A child's voice? Her brother's voice. Impossible, yet undeniable. She spun around, but there was nothing, only the quiet glow of the fire, the hush of rain, and the heavy sense that Maple Hill had waited years for this moment, for her return, and now it refused to let her leave until she faced what truly happened in this house. And from the hearth behind her came a sudden, sharp crackle, a burst of sparks leaping upward like a warning, reminding her that some stories, especially the ones hidden under rain and maple leaves, never fade quietly. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The rain softened into a misty whisper as Clara stood before the weathered cottage door, her lantern glowing like a warm ember in the grey afternoon. She hesitated not out of fear, but from the strange familiarity that wrapped around her like an old memory she couldn't quite touch. The brass key in her hand felt colder now, as if urging her to hurry before the twilight fully settled in the valley. She slid the key into the lock. A soft click echoed through the foyer as the door creaked open. A breath of cool, fragrant air spilled out lavender, old paper, and something faintly metallic, like the scent of rain-soaked iron. Clara stepped inside. The cottage was small yet inviting. Dusty shelves lined with books and trinkets leaned against the walls, each object covered in a fine layer of forgotten years. A fireplace sat dormant, its ashes untouched, though Clara felt an odd warmth radiating from it, as if someone had been there only moments before. Her lantern light brushed across framed photographs hanging crookedly. People she didn't know stared back with soft smiles, their faces blurred by time. But one frame made her pause. It held a photograph of a woman standing beside the very lake Clara had walked past earlier, at hair dark, her posture gentle, her hand resting on a railing Clara recognized. And yet, the woman's face had been scratched away, not by age, but by deliberate hands. A shiver crawled across Clara's spine. She moved deeper into the cottage, her footsteps muffled by the creaking wooden floor. On a small table rested a journal, its leather cover cracked but intact. The initials on the front MB felt strangely significant. She reached out, hesitating only for a moment before lifting the cover. The first page held a single line written in delicate, slanted ink. If you are reading this, then the rain has brought you here for a reason. Clara exhaled slowly. The silence around her deepened, as though the cottage itself was waiting for her reaction. She turned to the next page, another page also blank. She flipped through several more, each one the same empty canvas. But when she reached the final page, her lantern flickered violently. A blot of ink appeared, spreading like a dark bloom, and words began to slowly shape themselves across the page. Clara froze. The ink curled and stretched, forming letters before her eyes. Do not trust the reflections. The lantern dimmed, the shadows thickened, and somewhere behind her, faint but unmistakable, came a soft tapping like fingers brushing against a window pane dark. Clara turned, but the window was empty. Only the rayan, only the night, only the soft echo of something she could not yet understand. Still clutching the journal, she whispered into the dim, "What happened here?" The cottage answered with silence, but the feeling remained she was no longer alone. The tapping came again, soft, rhythmic, almost polite. Clara's grip tightened around the journal as she stepped toward the window, each breath shallow and uneven. Rain slid down the glass in wavering lines, distorting the world outside into a watercolor blur. She peered through it, searching for movement, but saw nothing except the quiet, silver-washed forest and the dim outline of the lake beyond. Still, the tapping continued. It wasn't coming from the window after all. Clara turned slowly, forcing herself to remain still long enough to listen. The sound was close, but muffled, as though it came from within the walls themselves, or from beneath the floorboards. Her lantern, now burning low, threw trembling shadows that stretched across the cottage interior like restless fingers. "Just the old wood," Clara whispered to herself. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Old Rudidan tea-tap-in patterns. It didn't hesitate. It didn't. Wait. Clara moved toward the fireplace, the journal still in her hand. The ashes inside were gray and undisturbed, yet she felt heat radiating faintly from the stone, as if a fire had burned just hours ago. Se nilt. Se nilt, brushing her fingers lightly over the edge of the hearth. Warm. Too warm. Her lantern sputtered. Something shifted behind her. Clara stood abruptly, spinning toward the noise. A wooden chair, which had been tucked neatly beside a small writing desk moments earlier, now stood slightly angled as if someone had just risen from it. Her breath caught in her throat. The tapping stopped. A sudden gust of cold air swept through the cottage, slamming the front door shut with a hollow thud. Clara jolted, her heartbeat thundering in her chest. She rushed to the door, twisted the handle locked. The key she had used to enter was still in the lock, but now it wouldn't budge, as though held in place by an unseen hand. The room felt smaller, closer. Watching, trying to steady herself, Clara stepped back from the door. The journal slipped open in her hand as she moved, falling naturally to the page where the warning had written itself moments ago. The ink was still wet, glistening faintly in the lantern's flicker. Do not trust the reflections. She swallowed hard. That sentence felt less like a warning and more like a command. She closed the journal gently, pressing the cover shut. She scanned the room again. The air was quieter now, but the stillness felt unnatural, deliberate, too expectant. The photographs on the walls seemed to lean forward in their frames, their blurred faces suddenly more unsettling than before. Her gaze drifted to a narrow hallway leading deeper into the cottage. She hadn't explored that part yet. The shadows pooling there seemed darker, heavier, as if the lantern's glow refused to enter. But Clara knew she couldn't remain standing frozen in the center of the room. The cottage felt alive, and something inside it wanted her to move. So she did. One step, then another. The floor creaked beneath her, long sighs escaping from the old boards. When she reached the hallway's entrance, she lifted the lantern high, though its weak flame barely pushed the shadows aside. The hallway stretched toward a closed door at the end, painted in a soft, faded blue. The tapping began again, slightly louder now, coming unmistakably from behind that door. "Hello," Clara called softly, though she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. Silence. She took a deep breath, reached out, and pushed the door open. The lantern illuminated a small bedroom. A neatly made bed sat beneath a window draped in sheer white curtains. An old wooden dresser stood against the wall, a tall mirror fixed above it. The mirror caught Clara's lantern light instantly, throwing her dim reflection back at her. She stepped inside cautiously. The tapping had stopped the moment she opened the door. Now there was only the hush of the rain outside, broken occasionally by distant thunder rolling through the valley. Clara crossed the room and approached the mirror. Her reflection stared back pale, tense, holding the lantern too tightly. She watched herself breathe, watched the tiny flame dance in the glass. Then her reflection blinked, but she hadn't. Clara stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. Her reflected self remained still now, frozen in place. But the moment she leaned forward again, peering into the glass, The reflection's eyes moved, not following her, but shifting towards something behind her. She spun around. The room was empty. Her reflection lifted its hand. Slowly, deliberately. Clara's real hand remained at her side. The reflected hand pressed its palm against the inside of the mirror, as though trying to reach through. A faint smudge appeared on the glass where the hand met, it clear, defined, and unmistakably real. "No," Clara whispered. The reflection's mouth parted. Though no sound came out, Clara could read the shape of the words. "You shouldn't have come." The lantern extinguished. Darkness swallowed the room. Clara froze in the darkness as the last ember of her lantern faded into nothing, leaving her wrapped in a silence so complete it seemed to muffle even her own breath. The cottage around her felt different now, as though walls had shifted, as though space itself had rearranged to hold its breath with her. She stood still, not daring to move, waiting for her eyes to adjust. But the darkness refused to lift. It was dense, thick, almost tactile. Then, slowly, a faint glow began to pulse within the mirror, soft at first, like moonlight trying to seep through fog. Clara felt her pulse quicken as she approached the dresser again, guided by that pale illumination. The reflection reappeared gradually, but it wasn't her face that formed first. It was the room behind her, vague and distorted, shaped by a bluish tint that didn't match the natural shadows of the cottage. Her own figure emerged last, but the reflection didn't stand where Clara stood. It stood closer, much closer, as if leaning forward from the inside. Clara forced herself to whisper, "What do you want?" Her voice barely rose above a breath. The reflection tilted its head in a slow, uneasy angle not matching Clara's movement. Then a soft vibration reverberated through the floorboards beneath her feet, like a distant hum, traveling up from the foundation of the cottage. The mirror brightened, and Clara saw something shifting behind the reflected version of herself, a figure, indistinct, tall, its outline wavering, like a shadow made of water. Rain intensified outside, driving against the window in rapid bursts, as though something in the storm mirrored the tension building within the cottage. Clara stepped back instinctively, her heel brushing against the bed frame. The vibration grew stronger, resolving into a low, rhythmic thump that echoed from beneath the bedroom floor. It was the same tapping, only heavier, more insistent, as if whatever had been trying to signal her was now trying to emerge. She stumbled to the far wall, pressing her back against the cold wooden paneling. The mirror flickered, and her reflection stared at her with wide, unfamiliar eyes before slowly raising an arm, not toward Clara now, but toward the bed. A chill slid down her spine. Clara crouched beside the bed frame, her hand trembling as she lifted the dust-coated bedskirt. Darkness, silence, but then another tap directly beneath her. She jerked back just as a thin line appeared in the floorboards, running along the length of the bed. A hatch, a concealed door. The boards trembled slightly, as though pushed from underneath. Clara stared, breath caught in her throat, unsure whether she should run or open it. The mirror gave a sudden flash of white, illuminating the room with an eerie light. Clara's reflection mouthed two words again. Find her. Her. The child. The woman in the photos. The writer of the journal. Clara grasped the journal tightly, flipping it open even as she crawled toward the hatch. The pages fluttered by themselves, stopping at an entry written in neat, careful handwriting. If the tapping begins again, the storm is near. The house remembers. The hill remembers. And she never left. A gust of icy air surged through the room, though no window had opened. Clara placed her fingers beneath the floorboard seam and lifted. The hatch rose with a soft groan, revealing a narrow staircase descending into a dimly lit cellar. A cold draft drifted upward, carrying the scent of damp earth and old wood. Clara hesitated at the top step. The mirror behind her trembled in its frame, then emitted a faint cracking sound as though straining under pressure. Clara glanced over her shoulder and inhaled sharply. Her reflection was gone. The mirror was empty. Only the room behind her showed. Then, in a single flash, a face pressed against the inside of the glass, a young girl with tangled hair, hollow eyes, and a pleading expression. Clara gasped and nearly lost her balance. The girl's breath fogged the glass from the inside. Inside. The cellar called to her. The girl's expression deepened with urgency, her small hand lifting to point downward. Clara swallowed her fear, steadied herself, and descended the creaking steps. Each step groaned under her weight, the narrow walls pressing close around her. At the bottom, a faint blue glow emanated from a far corner of the cellar. Clara approached slowly, lanternless, guided only by that ghostly light. As Sener. Then she saw a cluster of old crates, rotting beams, and a rocking chair that swayed back and forth, though no breeze touched it. In the center of the room lay a small wooden music box. It was open and playing, though no mechanism turned. A haunting lullaby filled the cellar, delicate and fragile, as if played by invisible hands. Clara knelt beside it. The journal slipped from her grasp and landed on the dirt floor, falling open to another page where new ink formed before her eyes. She is waiting. The light grew brighter. Clara lifted her head. In the far corner, a figure slowly materialized from the shadows, the small girl from the mirror, her outline shimmering in the dim blue glow, her bare feet hovering slightly above the ground. She stared at Clara with eyes full of sorrow and longing. "Who are you?" Clara whispered. The girl didn't speak. Instead, she lifted her hand and pointed toward a wooden beam that had collapsed against the wall. Beneath it lay a fragment of fabric, small, faded, patterned with tiny maple leaves. Clara reached for it, brushing off dust. It was the corner of a child's dress. The girl nodded, her form flickering as though pulled by unseen currents. Thunder cracked overhead. The ground trembled. Clara looked from the fabric to the ghostly girl and understood with a sinking heart. Something terrible had happened here. Something buried, something forgotten by everyone except the cottage and the hill itself. A whisper drifted through the cellar, soft, feminine, sorrowful. Help her remember. Clara took a shaky breath, clutching the fabric, staring at the ghostly child whose pleading gaze held centuries of pain. As the lullaby played its final trembling notes, Clara felt the weight of Maple Hill's forgotten story settle around her. And she knew this was only the beginning. The cellar air felt colder now, as though the entire hill above had begun to exhale a long, mournful sigh into the darkness around Clara. The ghostly girl hovered before her, flickering softly like a candle threatened by a breeze, yet her presence carried a strange warmth, a fragile sense of trust or desperation that reached Clara despite the chills sinking into her bones. Clara clutched the torn piece of dress tighter, its faded maple leaf pattern brushing against her fingers like a whisper from another lifetime. The girl's eyes, hollow yet glimmering with an unspoken plea, drifted toward the far end of the cellar, where shadows pooled. Clara followed her gaze, lifting her chin with slow, steady breaths, each inhale trembling in the frigid air. The music box had fallen silent, but its final note seemed to linger unnaturally long, as though suspended just above hearing. Clara took one cautious step, then another, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth's floor. The girl drifted beside her, not walking, but gliding, her translucent form gently illuminating the narrow passage that Clara hadn't noticed before, an uneven gap behind a collapsed beam where stone met timber. The gap seemed impossibly dark, swallowing even the faint bluish glow radiating from the girl. Clara hesitated. "You want me to go in there?" she whispered. The child nodded once, slow and solemn. Clara knelt, pushing aside rubble until she could slip through the narrow space. A stale draught brushed her face as she ducked beneath the beam, emerging into a cramped tunnel lined with rough stones slick with moisture. Roots hung from the ceiling like skeletal fingers, some brushing her shoulders as she moved forward. The girl followed silently, her faint glow bouncing off the stones, revealing faint markings etched into the wall scratches, symbols, maybe words, but too worn to decipher. Far behind them, somewhere in the cottage above, something groaned along, heavy sound like a shifting weight. Clara froze. The ghost girl's head snapped upward, her form flickering violently for a heartbeat before stabilizing. That sound wasn't the weather. It wasn't the wind. It was the cottageor. Something inside it moving. The tunnel sloped downward, ending at a low stone archway. Beyond it lay a circular chamber no larger than a child's bedroom. Clara stepped inside, the air colder than any she had felt since entering Maple Hill. In the center of the chamber sat a wooden chest, small and old, iron hinges, rusted yet intact. Dust blanketed its lid, undisturbed except for a set of tiny handprints pressed into the surface tube, spaced as if someone had knelt before the chest long ago. Clara's breath trembled as she reached out. Her fingers brushed the lid, and the temperature dropped sharply. Frost crackled along the chest's edge. The girl's glow dimmed slightly, her eyes widening in warning. But something in Clara's curiosity, or stubbornness, or a pull she couldn't explain urged her to lift it. The lid creaked open with a brittle sound. Inside lay a collection of small items. A cracked porcelain doll's head, a faded ribbon, and a leather-bound notebook no larger than the palm of her hand. Clara reached for the notebook first. The leather felt strangely warm despite the freezing air. She opened Italiano. Delicate, looping handwriting filled the page's entries, dated from the late 1800s. Mama says Maple Hill is special. She says the wind remembers things we forget. Clara blinked. Another entry. There is something in the house at night. It walks when Papa sleeps. It knows my name. A distant rumble shook the chamber, dust drifting from the roots above. The ghost girl flinched, her form rippling like disturbed water. Clara continued reading. If I hide my favorite things down here, maybe it won't take them too. Maybe it will leave me alone. Then the final entry ink smeared, the handwriting frantic. It came. For me. I hear it in the mirror. I hear my name in the rain. If someone finds this, please don't let it happen again. The chamber vibrated suddenly, the tunnel behind Clara echoing with a low thump, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, dragging. Not alien. Alien, not living. Clara's pulse hammered as she snapped the notebook shut. The ghost girl drifted closer, gripping Clara's sleeve, with tiny, trembling fingers that passed through fabric yet left a sensation like icy static on her skin. The child shook her head urgently, pointing back toward the tunnel. But the footsteps were coming from the tunnel, getting closer. Clara turned toward the opposite side of the chamber, searching for another exit, another passaging. The stone walls loomed solid and unbroken. The ghost girl lifted her hand and pressed it against the chest as if urging Clara to look again. Clara leaned over the chest and saw it. Beneath the doll's head and ribbon lay a second, hidden compartment. The wood had a barely visible seam. Another thump. Closer, now so close, she felt vibrations in the floor. With shaking fingers she lifted the false bottom. Beneath it lay a single object. A shard of a mirror. Edges jagged, surface darkened. The ghost girl's eyes widened with terror and recognition. Clara looked at the shardband. Her distorted reflection stared back. Only it wasn't alone. Another face moved behind hers, watching, breathing, smiling. So you found it. A faint voice whispered inside her mind, inside the chamber, inside the mirror shard. Clara dropped it, heart stopping as it clattered onto the dirt. The footsteps reached the archway. The chamber air tightened. The ghost girl's mouth parted in a silent scream, and with the storm above echoing the thunder inside the hill, Clara realized she wasn't trapped with the past. The past had found her asterisk. The chamber fell into a suffocating silence as the footsteps halted just beyond the archway, as though whatever lurked in the tunnel had paused to listen, listening to Clara's breath, listening to the pulse racing beneath her skin, listening for the smallest tremor of movement. Clara pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her palms sweating despite the icy air. The ghost girl hovered beside her, trembling uncontrollably now, her faint blue glow flickering like a dying ember. Clara dared a single shallow breath. The thing in the tunnel exhaled. It was not the breath of any living creature. It was long, hollow, and strangely wet, dragging along the walls like a whispered groan pulled from the earth itself. Clara clamped a hand over her mouth. The ghost girl reached toward her, not touching but urging her, pleading with her to stay still. Dust drifted from the archway stones as the presence shifted its weight. The scraping sound of raw, dragging limbs echoing softly in the narrow tunnel. Something pushed lightly against the archway to sting it, sniffing at the boundary, as though deciding whether to enter. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. For a moment, the chamber went still again, except for the faint hum of the music box far behind them, impossibly playing from the cellar, though it had stopped minutes before. Then an Abrupt crack. The archway stone fractured, hoosed slightly, as though brushed by an immense force. Clara's heart ceased. She almost ran, almost screamed, but she didn't move. The presence lingered for another long, unbearable moment. Then the footsteps, reluctantly dragging their weight back up the tunnel, until the sound faded into the distance, swallowed by the deeper echoes of the cellar. Clara didn't breathe until the ghost girl moved, drifting cautiously toward the tunnel entrance. When she confirmed it was empty, she turned back to Clara and gestured urgently toward the mirror shard lying in the dirt. Clara shook her head, reflexively. The girl's expression sharpened, not angry, but desperate. She needed Clara to understand something, to see something. Clara crouched slowly and lifted the shard. The surface trembled like a pool of water disturbed by an unseen hand. She stared into it, bracing herself. At first, she saw only her own face bell, shaken, eyes wide with fear. Then the reflection shifted, rippling outward. The chamber dissolved. The shard showed the past. A little girl, the ghost girl, sitting on the cellar floor, clutching the same maple leaf dress, now torn in Clara's hand. She rocked slowly, humming a soft tune that matched the music box melody. Her small shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Then, behind her, the mirror on the dresser upstairs, the same mirror Clara had in Cantabi, began to glow unnaturally, its surface warping. A shape emerged within it, tall and distorted, stretching like a shadow pulled from another world. The girl turned, sensing it. She whispered, throat tight with terror, "Not again." The shard flickered. The scene changed. The little girl ran up the cellar steps, slamming the hatch closed, pushing furniture in front of it with trembling arms. But the mirror above her whispered her name, whispered it sweetly, whispered it hungrily. The shard trembled harder. Another flash. The cottage shook violently, objects falling, doors slamming on their own. The child screamed, running toward the bedroom. The mirror's surface shattered outward instead of inward glass, bursting into the room as if expelled by something behind it. And then nothing. The reflection went dark. Clara lowered the shard, her hands trembling uncontrollably now. The ghost girl watched her mournfully, her form dimming. Clara whispered, "It took here." Through the mirror, the child nodded once, her expression hollow. Trembling breath escaped Clara's lips as she pieced it together. The mirror wasn't just haunted, it was a doorway, a trap. And whatever lived inside it wasn't a ghost. It was something older, anchored to Maple Hill long before the cottage stood. The girl drifted closer until her face hovered inches from Clara's. Her lips parted, and though no sound came, Clara felt the words as clearly as if they'd been spoken inside her mind. "It wants another." The chamber rumbled suddenly, a deep vibration rolling through the stone floor. Clara stumbled back, clutching the shard. The ghost girl pointed frantically toward the tunnel. They needed to move. Now, Clara bolted into the narrow passage, her heart hammering as she ducked beneath hanging roots and pushed through the tight stone walls. The ghost girl swept beside her, guiding her forward. her glow illuminating the way just enough to keep Clara from stumbling. The tunnel stretched longer than before, though the hill itself was shifting, trying to keep her inside. But Clara didn't stop. She crawled beneath the collapsed beam and emerged back into the cellar, panting, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped the shard again. The music box lay silent now, its lid fallen shut. The ghost girl pointed toward the staircase leading up to the cottage. Another tremor shook the cellar. Footsteps answered it, slow, deliberate, descending the stairs. But these weren't the dragging footsteps from the tunnel. These were lighter, human. Someone else was in the cottage. Someone living. Clara's blood froze. The girl looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "It's not who you think?" Clara backed into the shadows as the footsteps reached the bottom step. A lantern glow spilled over the cellar wall, warm, steady. A gentle voice followed, calling down softly. "Clara, are you down there? I've been waiting." Clara's stomach dropped. That was her mother's voice, but her mother had died years ago. The lantern glow brightened. The footsteps approached. Clara pressed herself against the wall, breath caught in the tightness of her chest, as the impossible voice called her name again. "Clara, sweetheart, come ere." The ghost girl shook her head violently, mouthing the word run. Thunder crashed above the cottage, and the cellar went dark except for the approaching lantern. Clara felt the shard heat in her hand glowing faintly, like a warning pulsing against her skin. The voice called once more, gentle, familiar, beckoning. "I'm here now. Don't be afraid." And Clara understood with perfect clarity. Whatever was calling her was not her mother. Asterisk. The warmth of the lantern glow crept across the cellar floor like a sunrise sweeping over a frozen landscape. But Clara felt no comfort in it, only dread, cold and absolute. Her chest tightened as the familiar voice drifted down the steps again, soft as a lullaby, threaded with the same tender cadence she had grown up hearing. "Clara, darling, please, it's all right. Come to me." Clara shook her head slowly, pressing back against the stone wall. The ghost girl hovered beside her, glowing faintly, her small form trembling with urgency. She pointed toward the far corner of the cellar, as if urging Clara to hide, but it was too late. The lantern's warm halo expanded, reaching the bottom of the staircase, and a silhouette appeared, slender, feminine, swaying slightly in the dim light. Mother, or the shape of her mother. Clara's breath hitched painfully. The figure descended one step, then another. Each footfall gentle, precise, unmistakably human. "I've missed you," the voice whispered, each syllable gentle enough to hurt. "I knew you'd come back." Clara fought the instinct to answer, to run toward the comfort she had craved for years. But the ghost girl's expression sharpened in warning. The cellar light flickered. The figure's shadow stretched unnaturally long across the dirt floor, bending at angles no human body could cast. Something inside Clara cracked with fear. The figure reached the bottom step. The lantern lifted, casting warm golden light across her face. Clara's heart clenched. The face was perfect, dull, perfect. Her mother's soft eyes, her gentle smile, the exact tilt of her head when she was comforting Clara as a child. But the eyes didn't blink. Clara's breath shivered out in a broken whisper. "You're not her." The figure paused. Its smile stretched just slightly too wide, too smooth, like a painting bending at the edges. "But I can be," it murmured, stepping forward. The ghost girl darted between them, her small form flaring bright as a shield. The Nut Mother halted instantly, her smile freezing. She tilted her head, studying the ghost child with unnatural stillness. Then, when she spoke, her voice cracked like peeling paint. "You again." The cellar temperature plummeted. Frost bloomed over the stones like spreading veins. The ghost girl's glow flickered violently. Clara felt panic burst inside her chest. She grabbed the shard of mirror tighter. It pulsed against her palm, vibrating softly, as if responding to the creature's presence. The Nut Mother's gaze snapped toward the shard, her smile dropping into something hollow, ancient, furious. "Put that down, Clara," she whispered, voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. "You don't know what you're holding." Clara backed away. The ghost girl took her hand or passed through it, but the sensation of cold static pushed Clara toward the far wall. Toward safety. The Nut Mother moved closer, the lantern light flickering strangely around her. "You're frightened," she crooned. "Of course you are. Let me hold you. Let me fix this." Clara swallowed. "My mother never came down here. She hated this cellar. She wouldn't." The creature's face twitched, a ripple, like fabric pulling too tight. "She wouldn't what, Clara?" Clara steadied herself. "She wouldn't follow me into the dark." The silence that followed stretched thin and sharp. Then the Nut Mother blinked once, slow, mechanical, and when she opened her eyes, they were hollow black pits, swallowing the lantern flame directly into their depths. The lantern shattered. Darkness devoured the cellar. Clara gasped as cold burst through her like a rushing wave. The creature lunged. The ghost girl threw herself forward, glowing brighter than Clara had ever seen, brighter than the lantern had glowed, brighter than the cellar could contain. The blast of blue-white light hit the creature full force, slamming her backward into the staircase. A scream tore through the darkness, not human, not earthly, a shriek, like glass grinding against bone, like wind forcing itself through a crack in the world. The cellar trembled violently. The ghost girl flickered, dimming, her tiny form straining to hold the creature at bay. Clara felt the shard in her hand pulse again harder, like a heartbeat syncing with hers. An instinct, primal and absolute, washed over her. She lifted the shard toward the creature. The mirror fragment caught the ghost girl's fading glow and amplified it into a beam of light that struck the creature's face. The scream intensified. The creature's form split, shimmered, fractured like reflection shattering across broken glass. Then it shrank backward, retreating up the stairs with inhuman speed until it vanished into the darkness above. Silence fell thick, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. The ghost girl collapsed to the cellar floor, her glow nearly gone. Clara rushed to her, panic rising like a flood. No, stay with me, please." The girl lifted her faint, shimmering hand toward Clara's cheek. Her voice reached Clara's mind in a quiet whisper. "It's getting weaker, because..." "You found the shard?" Clara squeezed the girl's cold, fading hand. What is it? The girl's form flickered. A hunger, a shadow, a memory of something buried under Maple Hill. She looked at the shard in Clara's grasp. It can't touch you while you hold that, but it's still here. And it's angry. A thunderous crack echoed through the cottage above, shaking dust loose from the beams. The ghost girl's eyes widened. It's coming back. Clara's pulse spiked. She lifted the shard, heart pounding, and whispered, "Then we don't run." The girl nodded, weakly. "No, we face Italiano." Footsteps slammed across the cottage floor, above them fast, furious, no longer pretending to be human. Clara stood, the shard glowing like a living flame in her hand. "Come on," she whispered to the fading child. "This ends tonight." Clara felt the world narrowing as she stepped deeper into the forest. The lantern's glow thinning against a darkness that seemed to breathe. Maple Hill had always been quiet, but tonight the silence felt stretched, pulled taut, like a string ready to snap. The path beneath her boots softened into moss, then into damp earth, then into something that felt neither natural nor familiar almost, as if she were walking across memories rather than soil. Behind her, the sound of distant bells drifted through the trees, the same mournful chime she had heard earlier near the ruins of the old festival grounds. She didn't turn back this time. In the journal she clutched, new ink had appeared during her walk, as though written by a hurried, trembling hand. The veil is thinning. Once opened, it cannot be closed. Clara pressed the journal tight against her chest, feeling the echo of each written word thrum against her heartbeat. The forest grew colder. Branches above her tangled into a canopy so dense that the moonlight vanished entirely, leaving her lantern as the only fragile point of warmth. Shadows moved where nothing else did, gliding at the edges of her vision. Slipping behind trees, just before she could focus on them, she slowed her steps, forcing her breaths to remain steady. "I'm not here to harm you," she whispered into the dark, though she wasn't sure whom she was speaking to. The forest responded with a soft creaking, like old wood shifting under a weight it remembered too well. That was when Clara saw it faint at first, then unmistakable. A shape stepped onto the path ahead. A woman, or what remained of one. She stood motionless, her silhouette etched in pale gray, as though the air itself hesitated to touch her. Her dress, long and torn at the hem, shimmered faintly with moisture, as if woven from rain. Her hair hung in loose waves, drifting slightly despite the stillness of the night. But her face, Clara's breath froze. Her face was obscured, blurred like an old photograph smudged by time. "You came back," the figure whispered, the voice soft as fallen mist. Clara felt the words rather than heard them, a vibration inside her ribs. I don't know you," Clara replied, though something deep within her felt the lie. The figure tilted her head gently, the way someone might when recognizing an old friend who had changed too much. "All seekers return. The hill remembers every promise made on its soil." Clara tightened her grip on the lantern. "What promise?" The woman lifted a hand, and the lantern's flame flickered violently. At her gesture, the trees parted slightly, revealing an old wooden post standing alone in the clearing ahead. Embedded into it was a rusted plaque, its lettering warped but still readable under the trembling lantern light. Maple Hill Harvest Festival -1874. In memory of those lost to the descent, may their echoes fade gently. Clara blinked. The word descent pulsed in her mind like a bruise. What happened here? She whispered. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned toward the plaque, lifting her hand again. Her fingers hovered inches above the metal surface, though her touch never landed. They called it tradition, she murmured, a celebration to honor the change of seasons, the thinning of the veil, the passing of the old year into the new. But power always invites hunger. The hill was meant to be a threshold, not a feeding ground. Clara felt the cold seep into her bones. The woman continued. They opened what should have stayed shut, and the hill kept what it was given. A wind rose through the clearing, carrying with it the faint echo of laughter, children's laughter overlaid with something darker, lower, like a growl swallowed by distance. Clara took one careful step closer to the figure. Why show me this? For the first time, the woman turned toward Clara fully, and though her face remained blurred, Clara sensed sorrow so profound it bent the air around her. Because you carry the mark of a seeker, the woman said, and seekers are the only ones who can end what was begun. Clara felt her pulse tighten. How? The woman lifted her hand slowly, placing it over her own heart. By remembering what the others forgot. Before Clara could speak again, the forest shifted. The trees leaned inward, the ground rippling like disturbed water, the air thickening so suddenly Clara staggered. The woman's form flickered once, twice, then dissolved into a swirl of mist that drifted upward and vanished. Clara was alone again. The lantern's flame burned low, trembling as though afraid. Behind her, the forest exhaled a long, rattling sigh, and from somewhere deep within Maple Hill, she heard it, a whisper, distant yet unmistakable, her name. Clara. She swallowed, lifted the lantern, and stepped forward into the dark, knowing whatever waited ahead had already begun to follow. Clara's feet sank into the damp earth as she pressed forward. The lantern cast in flickering light over roots and fallen branches that seemed to twist and writhe under the shadows. The whisper of her name carried on the wind, soft, teasing, impossible to ignore. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remember the words from the journal. The veil is thinning. Once opened, it cannot be closed. Every step she took, the forest felt alive in a way that was more than just natural. Trees leaned slightly toward her, their twisted limbs like bony fingers pointing her forward, and the wind carried faint echoes of laughter and sobbing, layered together so her mind struggled to separate joy from grief. She rounded a bend and stumbled onto a clearing that felt impossibly still, the air thick, heavy, and vibrating with anticipation. In the center, a long-abandoned stone fountain set cracked and moscover, the basin empty, yet ripples of faint light shimmered across its surface as if reflecting something not visible to the eye. Clara? Ferocity. There, reflected in the pool of impossible water, were faces dozens of Tim, pale and watchful, the children and adults of past festivals, their expressions caught between celebration and terror, their eyes hollow yet pleading. A chill gripped her spine. She realized she was standing on the grounds where the hill had taken what it demanded, where generations had left fragments of themselves behind. The lantern's glow wavered, and the wind rose, tugging at her hair and clothes, carrying soft whispers. Remember, remember. She knelt slowly beside the fountain, brushing her fingers across the cold stone edge. The faces shimmered, almost moving closer, reaching out in silent gestures. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as the forest around her shifted subtly, leaves rustling though no breeze touched them. Then she saw it, the faint outline of the ghost girl hovering at the edge of the clearing, her glow barely enough to pierce the shadows. The girl pointed toward a narrow, worn path that led down the slope of the hill, twisting between ancient trees that leaned like guardians. Clara knew instinctively she had to follow. She tightened her grip on the journal, the leather warm against her palm, and took the first step down the slope. The forest seemed to tighten around her, the roots pressing at her ankles, the air growing thick, almost viscous, with a presence she could not see but could feel, watching, waiting. Every step made the whispers louder, repeating in cycles. Remember the name, remember the promise, remember the choice. Clara stumbled as the path narrowed, her lantern flickering and casting shadows that moved independently of the trees. At the bottom of the slope, the path opened into another clearing, this one dominated by the ruins of a small wooden stage, long abandoned and cracked, a remnant of festivals past. Candles, unlit yet faintly glowing, as if waiting for a spark, lined the edges of the platform. The ghost girl floated to the center of the stage, her small hands lifted toward the heavens, her glow intensifying until Clara had to shield her eyes. Then, with a soft, melodic hum, the girl began to call out names of the lost, of those who had disappeared into the hill over centuries, whispered in a voice Clara felt inside her chest. The wind carried the words, swirling around her, pulling at memories she did not know she had. The journal in her hand trembled. New words appeared, as if written by invisible fingers. The hill hungers for closure. You must give it what it seeks. Clara's throat tightened. What closure? She whispered, voice breaking. The ghost girl's glow shifted, pointing toward the fountain. Clara understood. The hill did not just demand victims, it demanded remembrance, recognition. She approached the fountain again, looking into its rippling surface. She spoke aloud the names she saw in the reflections, each one resonating through the forest like a bell tolling for the forgotten. Mary, Thomas, Eleanor, Jacob, Lillian. The ripples stilled with every name, and the whisper softened, turning almost gentle. The ghost girl's glow pulsed brighter with each spoken name. Then, silence. Clara exhaled slowly, the tension in her chest easing slightly. Though a lingering dread remained, the forest seemed to relax, the wind quieting, shadows settling. Yet she knew the hill still waited, still watched. She lifted her lantern, eyes scanning the path back up the slope. The glow of the ghost girl remained a beacon, soft but unwavering. Clara understood that the journey was far from over, but in this moment she had given the hill a fragment of peace, a promise kept after decades of forgetting. And as she stepped toward the path, the echoes of the past seemed to murmur a final, fragile thank you. The journal rested against her chest, warm, pulsing like a heartbeat, as if aware that she had survived the first test. She exhaled again, steadying herself. Whatever lay ahead, whatever waited in the darkened rooms of the cottage, in the mirrors, in the shadows, it would not find her unprepared. Not tonight. Clara climbed slowly back up the winding slope of Maple Hill. The forest now quieter, though an almost tangible tension lingered in the air, like the faint vibration of a drumbeat from the heart of the earth itself. The lantern trembled in her hand, casting long, wavering shadows across gnarled roots and fallen leaves, and she felt the weight of the hill pressing gently against her back, as if urging her onward. The ghost girl floated beside her, glowing faintly, her form barely enough to illuminate the path, but enough to remind Clara that she was not alone. Each step up the hill felt heavier than the last, and yet a strange clarity guided Clara forward, a sense that the hill itself had recognized her intentions, even if the danger lurking within it had not yet relented. She reached the clearing near the ruined festival stage, now bathed in the soft, ghostly glow of the moon, and paused. The fountain sat silent, its water now perfectly still, reflecting a sky she hadn't noticed through the dense canopy. The names she had spoken earlier seemed to ripple faintly in her memory, echoing softly as if the hill remembered them too. The journal vibrated lightly in her hands, and Clara knew it had more to show her, more to guide her through. She flipped the pages carefully, noting a series of sketches she had not seen before, winding staircases, hidden doors, and mirrors framed in elaborate brass, just like the one in the cottage. Beneath the sketches, a single sentence was written in hurried, spidery handwriting. The mirror remembers the past. Step through, and the hill will speak. Clara felt a chill. She knew what the journal was telling her. She had survived the hill's first test, but the real journey was not over. The cottage still waited, its darkened rooms hiding the next truth, the next reflection, the next memory that must be faced. The ghost girl floated forward, pointing toward a faint light emerging through the trees, the cottage windows, glowing softly despite the storm that still raged in the distance. Clara followed, each step measured, her senses alert to every whisper of wind, every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow that seemed to shift unnaturally in her peripheral vision. The closer she drew to the cottage, the heavier the air became, thick with centuries of unspoken secrets, unremembered tragedies, and the weight of every choice made on Maple Hill. She paused at the doorstep, her lantern's flame quivering against the rising cold. The ghost girl hovered beside her, her glow now brightening, a faint, steady pulse like the heartbeat of the hill itself. Clara exhaled slowly, pressing her hand against the journal once more, feeling the warmth of the pages and the wisdom they carried. With a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the old hinges echoing like a drumbeat in the stillness. The cottage interior smelt of damp wood and old paper, of rain that had seeped into its bones decades ago. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting and elongating as if they were alive, as if they had waited for her arrival all this time. Clara moved carefully through the hallway, lantern light brushing against faded photographs, dust-coated furniture, and the worn carpet that had softened under countless footsteps long since vanished. Her heart thumped steadily in her chest, keeping pace with the faint, insistent hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cottage. She approached the room where the first mirror had awaited her, the same ornate brass frame gleaming faintly despite the dim light. The shot in her hand vibrated again, pulsing with a warmth that both reassured and warned her. Clara set it carefully on the floor, its reflective surface catching a sliver of the lantern's glow. Then she stepped closer to the full mirror. Her reflection appeared immediately hers, unbroken, normal, yet banded. Faint shapes began to shift, like memories barely held in the corners of her mind. She could feel the pull of the mirror, gentle but irresistible, urging her to look deeper, to step closer to face the truths it held. And in that moment, Clara understood fully. The hill, the cottage, the mirror, and the ghost girl, they were not here to harm her. They were here to show her, to guide her through the weight of the past, to ensure that memory was not lost and that those who had been forgotten could finally be seen. She took a deep, steadying breath, closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and then opened them. The mirror's surface rippled, as if water, inviting her forward. The ghost girl floated beside her, whispering, though no sound reached Clara's ears. The words formed in her mind. Step through, face the truth. Remember. Clara lifted her lantern higher, letting the glow spill across the mirror's surface. She could see the faintest shimmer of movement within the glass, like the dance of shadows and light over decades of untold stories. And with a courage that surprised her own heart, she stepped forward into the mirror. The glass swallowed her gently, like a calm tide pulling her beneath its surface, and for a moment she felt weightless, suspended in time and memory, between the world she knew and the one she was about to confront.